All right, guys. Quick one today. Hopefully, I know I say that all the time, but I'm really going to try this time. Um, to begin with, just so I don't miss it, I want to make sure to mention you have bibs coming up. Two entries. These are the note-taking assignments that I have you guys do to sort of help you organize information, help you organize your sources as you find them. You have two due. I say today because this video is for tomorrow, but hopefully that makes sense. Always use the syllabus. You have two more bibs due next week. And originally, I had planned to pull some bibs, talk about them. We may do that next week. What I actually decided to do, semi last minute, I, I'm a little bit worried. Not, I mean, again, I always try to be really clear with you guys. I'm not worried because of anything I've seen from those of you who've turned in work, those of you who've sent me things. But I'm worried. This is the first semester I've taught this particular class online, and normally, so much of this class is built on um, sort of in-person discussion. For obvious reasons, we can't do that. This is an asynchronous class. Um, so basically, I want to be super, super sure that you guys understand what the paper is actually asking you to do. And to do that, I've actually pulled the beginning of a paper turned in from a student last year, last semester. Very recent. Dates are hard for me, but anyway, very recently. This is the introduction and the very beginning of their first body paragraph. And obviously, I'm going to post this as a separate document as well. But this is the whole thing. I got it to fit on the screen here for you, so you can read it here if you like. Now, I will say, before we dive into it, of course, I'll need you to read it. Um, so if you haven't, go ahead and pause. I'll give you a beat to pause here and read the thing. Go for it. Okay. Hopefully that happened. So what are we looking at? Well, a couple things. First of all, I want to keep this a little bit general because, again, the whole point of this video is to make doubly sure you understand what it is we're trying to do in these papers. They didn't write about a particular person. That's what most people do. But as I say in the prompt and in discussion of the prompt, it can be about a kind of a movement. They went with, honestly, a pretty insane conspiracy theory that I'd never heard of. Um, and if you've read the document, I would imagine you too, hopefully, think that it's bananas. But okay, so already from the jump, our immediate reaction is, well, that's fucking crazy, because it is. But we got to have more to say about it than that, right? And again, I always try to steer you guys toward, well, what does it say about us as a people, a society, a culture, that there are people who even entertain thoughts like these, right? Well, let's see how they handled it in the introduction. First of all, of course, given what they're talking about, they got to actually lay out what birds aren't real means. And unfortunately, it means just what it says, that all the birds we have now are fake. And yeah, where do we go after that though? From here, this is really our roadmap, okay? We bring in two of our primary sources, James Crowley and Peter McIndoe, I'm going to say is how you pronounce that guy's name. Uh, People on opposite sides of the debate. One of them, the Newsweek guy, clearly feels like this is ridiculous. The other guy is somehow convinced of the theory's validity. Um, and again, I want to make a point about this. Our student doesn't spend too much time with their ideas, because once you introduce what they're arguing about and you say they're on opposite sides, it's pretty clear what their ideas are, right? What she does is try to make her own argument about why it is people, again, entertain thoughts like these, and she comes down to a discussion of bias. Now, before we get into that, just to be clear again, with most arguments, and I don't think this one's any different, you usually have a couple options. Bias is fine for this discussion, but there are other directions she could have headed in. And what she ends up saying, it starts right here, right? And some of this to begin with, it could be a bit banal. Like everyone has their own bias, they build their own truth. Especially in 2022, I think most of us would agree with that to some degree, right? But she goes further. She makes it more argumentative, and she says that that's how they build their reality. Now, that's an interesting idea. And she goes into a little bit again about kind of basically talking why this conspiracy theory is insane. But then after that, she gets to, as humans rush to find even the slightest indication that our biases are true, we lose the ability to decipher between fact and fiction. So this is actually an idea that's existed for a while. It's sort of called the death of truth by some people. This idea um, that so many people believe exactly what they want to believe, despite evidence, or oftentimes uh, through the lack of any evidence. Um, that there is no like capital T truth anymore that we can all subscribe to. Um, People who sort of tout this idea they don't say it like that's true, but merely that that's the world we live in now, if that makes sense. I say all that to say, her thesis, really these last two sentences, right? Because people build their version of reality on their biases, anyone can create a ridiculous conspiracy and convince others that it's factual. Again, unfortunately, I think that's true. Society does not have absolute truth or fiction, especially considering the larger issue of misinformation. So her thesis here, again, what does the fact, and it's a fact, that the birds aren't real movement exists, what does that say about us as a people, a society, a culture? You may not, and I may not, even before I read this paper, even know that the birds aren't real thing was a thing. Okay, sure. But now that we know that there are people out there, quite a few of them, I imagine, who think this is even possible, okay, or likely, what does it say about us as a culture that those people exist, right? And again, there's multiple possibilities, but the one that this student came down on was basically that those people are sort of given to have thoughts like that to begin with, and rather than maybe back in the day when, you know, I don't know, some self doubt might have creeped in. We don't have that anymore. We just have mechanisms in place, like we talked about all semester, primarily through things like social media, that allow people to do nothing but reinforce their own biases. And if that's the world we live in, and that's kind of her argument, what does that lead to? Well, according to her thesis, it leads to the construction of your own reality, where you can live in a world where you think when you hear a bird maybe singing or something, you're like, oh, they're watching me. Um, I'm having a bit of fun with that because honestly, that might be a coping mechanism for just the idea that anyone could think things like this. Um, Now, all that said, again, that's kind of the main thrust of her paper. I gave you the very beginning of her first body paragraph down here. I wanted to highlight a couple things again. Number one, this is her topic sentence, okay? Birds aren't real movement is representative of the perception. So I quibble a little bit with her phrasing, but anyway, I'm going to decipher it for you. This movement is representative of the perception of misinformation in the media and news today. No one really knows what to believe. One angle she takes into talking about biases, and she mentions misinformation at the end of her thesis statement, is it's kind of a chicken egg scenario if you're familiar with that metaphor. Like, I remember talking to her at the time. She initially, and some people, this is an interesting bias we have today. Initially, she wanted to lay much more of the blame in her paper at the feet of the quote unquote media, right? And that's a pretty common refrain. You hear that all the time. Um, the point I made to her, not that the quote unquote media is not to blame. Again, they play a role for sure. She's going to talk about it in this paragraph. But the media, and most often we mean like, television news, things like that, They only do those things because decades ago, they were primarily concerned with truth, with accuracy. Now, a lot of the time, they're concerned with money. So, what does that really mean? They're reporting the way that they're reporting because people watch it. So, in as much as the media is to blame, and they are, we're to blame too because we want that stuff. And that's a fun little thing that most people ignore. I think the argument I might make if I were to add to hers is we don't like to take responsibility for ourselves or our own stupid ideas, right? Um, but anyway, my point is she didn't make that after, she worked on this paper a lot actually. Um, this point she makes in this body paragraph initially was more or less her entire thesis, but you see now it's just a part of it. She's kind of branched out to consider all of us, not just the media, which is a part of our society. Um, but I guess the last point I want to make to you guys here is no matter what you look at, you want to try to keep in mind we're all complicit. We're all a part of this. Some are more a part of it than others. Okay, I'm not disputing that, but we all play a role in a lot of this. So it's important to try to consider it like that. And sometimes the arguments you come up with, the ideas that'll crop up as you look through different sources and you think about it yourselves, they won't always be fun. They won't always be your favorite thing to think of. That's okay, right? Um, it's important to at least consider those. I mean, do they make sense to you? Can you prove them? She did a really good job in this paper, just to be clear. Um, this is the best paper she wrote all semester. I was proud of her. Like, so that's why I pulled it for you guys. Like, this is what we're looking for. This is the kind of argument when I say what what does the fact that this person or this movement exists, what does it say about us as a people, a society, a culture? You see there in her thesis, she is not focused on the text itself because you could very easily argue that this is insane, but that's not what we're doing here. We're focused on what does it say about us that that's a real thing that people believe. There's all kinds of things like that out there. Again, to spin it back to what a lot of you are writing about, what does it say about us um, that people react the way that they do to certain, I guess, maybe celebrity missteps would be a way to sum a lot of them up, right? Not just the missteps themselves, but again, how people react, how people treat other people, especially in a lot of cases when we stop viewing them as people. That I think that'll factor into a lot of your arguments based upon what I've seen. Anyway, that's the gist. To tie it back into what we're working on right now, which is the bibs, she had this is like her primary source, basically. She found a really good interview from Newsweek between this guy talking to that idiot about birds aren't real. And it was awesome because, again, you got James Crowley, who's this seasoned reporter who, at least in the interview, just sounds like a normal person who's like, who honestly, if I remember correctly, does an excellent job of hiding the fact that there's no way he doesn't think this is stupid, right? He's very professional. And the other guy honestly tries to build a reasonable argument for birds aren't real, which is interesting too. But it's a great source because it breaks down both sides. And then from there, as soon as she hit that bias angle, there's all kinds of arguments out there about that. Like that's where the rest of her research kind of went. All she needed in her case was this interview to think about this ridiculous stuff. And then once she kind of figured out the gist of her argument, the rest of her research came down to this stuff, seeing what other people said, forming her own ideas based upon that. And that's really what I'd like you guys to try to do. It starts with research, but to underscore it here, and this will be the end of the video. I think I finally made a short one. It starts with research, but the thing I want to remind you guys is you're not just researching, okay? As you look through stuff, you're doing your best to vet it, to figure out if it works for you. And by that, I mean, what kinds of arguments do you have yourselves? Do you agree with a source, disagree? Does it modify your opinion in any way? Do you see it sort of in conversation with another source that you found? Like anything like that, right? That's kind of the mode we're in right now. And eventually, relatively soon, not super soon, but relatively soon, we'll start building papers just like this one. This particular document, as I said, will be up on Courseden, so you can refer to it if you like. That's really the video for today. Don't forget, we have bibs due for Thursday. We have bibs due for Tuesday. And yeah, after that, we'll start actually working on these papers. All right. Other than that, hope everyone is well. My whole house is sick, which is awesome. And I'm just trying to survive. So I hope you guys are well. And yeah, that's all I got. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.